Hey y'all, I'm Gina Rosenthal. I'm the founder and CEO of Digital Sunshine Solutions. We are a fractional product marketing agency in Austin, Texas, and I'm happy to talk to you today about generative AI tools. What could go wrong? And I say what could go wrong because this is all anyone can talk about right now. Chat GPT, what's going on with Microsoft, what's Google doing with Bard. Bill Gates has even said the age of AI has begun. So we're here into the second age. We came out of the winter, we're ready to go. All sorts of statements from different people. This one kind of stuck out to me from a professor at Harvard saying that the future of the internet is going to be 90% of it's going to not be written by humans. 90% of it's going to be written by bots, by machines. It's a little crazy when you think about it. So if there's that much power in generative AI, there has to be a market for it. If so many people are talking for it, has to be a market for it. So I looked up the TAM, or the total addressable market, for generative AI. And this year it was last year, $10.14 billion market available to go figure out how to provide generative AI for people. And that's expected to grow by 2030 at a compound annual growth rate of 35.6%. That's a pretty steep growth rate as well. Big market. So it must be cool, right? Must be good. Okay, so what is generative AI? Just so we can make sure we're talking about the same time. So a very basic, super high level definition is that generative AI is going to generate new data based on the data on which it's been trained. So you need some training data, but it can make new data. That brings us back to, how do machines learn? So this is not an AI discussion. So this is a technical discussion. So it's going to be very high level. But the way you teach a machine to do something is you have a question you want to answer. This is with all generative tools. This is with anything, how you teach machines to learn. This one, of course, is not going to be ChatGPT. This is going to be images. How can you tell the difference between Jason Momoa and Maui from Moana? So the first thing you do is you get a whole bunch of data, a whole bunch of pictures of both of them, maybe pictures of their tattoos, their hair, who they hang out with, that kind of thing. And you have an untrained neural network. And I say you, but it's really going to be a data scientist. And the neural networks are just workloads. IT people will call them workloads, but they are super, super intense mathematical workings, and way too much math for me. Really smart data scientists people, that's their job, is to figure out which neural network is appropriate to figure out the problem you want to solve. So first you get lots and lots of data about Jason Momoa and Maui, and you put it together and you set your neural network on it. It starts learning the differences, all the different tattoos, the hair, the poses, Aquaman suit or not, the different costumes, all the rest of it. The next thing you'll do once they've got it to a good state is they'll send that algorithm, once it's been trained on what it's going to look for, through a validation set. And all those numbers you see on that trained neural network is the weights, that now we know if I move this different weights, it's to get the bottom part, the percentages, closer and closer to 100, which is what I want. Once I've gone through that validation set, then I get some brand new data that isn't tagged, by the way. This first sets of data are tagged, so giving the neural network a little bit of a head start. Not tagged, and as long as you get that high percentage that you were expecting, you've taught the machine how to know the difference between Moana and Jason Momoa. Well, Maui from Moana. Sorry about that. But the question really is, can generative AI machines be trained to do a task? Can you train a machine? And those words actually kind of matter, because not really. You can't really teach a machine to do something. Let's go back to the whole idea of GPT and generative AI when we talk about text. All GPT does is it's trained on a bunch of words, and it just does next word prediction. And so, like, if you're writing an email, you're going to say, "Dear somebody, comma, please send me a resume and we will meet next week," whatever that's going to be. If you're going to write a resume, it's going to have your name at the top. It's going to have where you went to college, your last 5 jobs, the things you did. So you can give it that kind of information based on how it was fine-tuned and how those weights were set in the algorithm. That's what it's going to come back with. And the GPT model can do a lot of things. We've seen it. We've seen it do things like it can, pass the bar exam. It can write a script. It can solve problems. It can do all sorts of things. But was it trained to do that? And it's really important to remember that no, it was trained to figure out what's the next word, what's the next word, what's the next word in a string of words and put it into a certain format based on the parameters it was given, was fed into it. So, so what? Those are just a little, we're trying to make sense of it to the common people like us that aren't smart data scientists. It trained the machines. What could go wrong with this? There's actually a whole bunch that could go wrong with us, right?
Uh-oh.
So these are things just to think about when you think about generative AI. ChatGPT is the big hot one, so let's talk about that for a minute. What data set has been used to train ChatGPT? ChatGPT was trained on the entire internet, right? So all of it. So that brings in bias based on the internet. So like it or not, most of the voices on the internet for the time it's been around have been men. And so there's a lot of just bias built in that way. It could be gender bias, right? So if all of the content that is the majority of content that was fed into ChatGPT came from the wide internet, if you want to ask a question about what gender are doctors, mostly it was men. It's talked about being men. That's the answers we're going to get back. Not that even lets out any kind of gender differences and gender nuances that we're now learning to appreciate and acknowledge in the world. Just things like calling undocumented immigrants illegals, which makes most of us cringe, but there's a lot of that out on there on the wide world of the internet, right? And then racial slurs, that's a pretty easy one to see, even with the images, not just ChatGPT. That Microsoft has fought and dealt with a lot of that. I mean, looking at Michelle Obama and all the racist things she went with, pictures of her described as monkeys, like really awful things. So what did the companies do? They try to protect us as the citizens of the world, just trying to use this new technology, make our lives easier from that really horrible stuff. They can't do that with machines. It has to be tagged by hand. And the really, really awful, awful stuff has to be removed and tagged as we don't use this in our system train with by hand. And a lot of this is not done in in countries where there's strict rules around employment and things. It's done in places like Kenya. Um, and this outsourcer said this was in retaliation, kind of a statement to cover them. We do the best things for our people. They only have to label 70 sex passages for their 9-hour shifts, and they earn between $1.46 and $3.74 an hour after taxes. The horrible, great rate maybe for where they are, but not really when you think about the possibilities of what this generative AI can do, and especially where for countries that aren't going to receive the benefits for it, at least right away. They won't see the good from it. So if they're cleaning up this dark web atrocities, there's been more to say that they have not even gotten any support from mental health people, that they are just kind of hung out to dry. The human cost of going into a country and taking their best and brightest to train to go and find the worst things on the dark web so we don't have to deal with them is really kind of awful. Another thing is the environmental cost. This is a big deal, and this is something that all of us can wrap our heads around, I think, pretty easily. So on the right here, it's showing what the CO2 emissions in tons are for just a human, air travel, an American life, a car, and then it looks at the very end is ChatGPT and the GPT, not ChatGPT, just GPT-3, and then GPT-4 was even higher than that. It is extremely environmental insensitive to train these algorithms. And at this point, we've now got Microsoft doing this. And I saw an article the other day that in the Midwest, where Microsoft has all of its data centers where it's doing this work, they've actually made the heat go up in that area during an intensely heated summer anyways. So we are going to pay environmental costs for this, and how many different types of models can we have and can we afford to have from an environmental standpoint? We've got our artists striking, right? So in the US, we have the actors and the writers, and they're striking because their employers want to use their likenesses or their words in perpetuum without paying them for any derivatives that are made from it by any type of AI. That's kind of interesting. And even more recently, do we really need one search to rule them all? Microsoft doesn't think we do. They spoke at the Google antitrust about a week ago, hearings about a week ago, because of what what Google is doing. So they put AI in their search, and this is what it looks like if you've turned it on. What's even crazier is Quora, that it works very closely with Google. They have like the top 5 search results now because it's supporting this AI. That AI is working with the Quora AI. So if you're paying for search, you're kind of screwed because you're going to be in the middle of the page on that same topic. So is it really okay that we just get the search from one big brain of a company? So it's lots of brains doing it, but one algorithm. And is that going to bring us the information we need to see and have, or we're going to be left out of having some of the information? So we're in the beginning of this whole, we're in the beginning of this entire thing with generative AI taking off. And it is important. Lots of important work and workloads and help can come from being able to use machines to help us make decisions. This right now is not the time to go fast and break things. We should pay attention to the people who are trying to give the warnings. This paper is a pretty infamous paper. I call it the stochastic parrots paper about language models. Can they get too big? This paper is what got most of the Google ethics team fired for publishing this paper, because it brought out some of the points that I just brought out, that Google didn't want that to happen because Google wants to go to market with their AI. But this paper is fantastic. It's in the ACM libraries, and I can help you out seeing one. This is one of the women, Timnit Gebru, and she could see what's happening when she was at Google, who's building these and what they're being used for, which is military over anything else. And she was like, we got a problem. This is Joy Willem-Winnie. She was at Harvard and doing one of the first year computer science things that they do. And she wanted to do something with facial recognition, and none of the algorithms could recognize her because she's an African woman and she's very dark skinned, as you see. And so wrote a study about this and how that could be corrected, and actually created the Algorithm of Justice League, which is a fantastic resource if you really want to know what's going on behind the scenes, and how we, especially as technologists, can help. That's always been our role as infrastructure people, is to protect the data at all costs. And this is another one of those things. But really, generative AI is not a bad thing. It's a great thing for humanity, but you got to see it for what it is. It's a stochastic parrot. It's only going to repeat what it's been told. It's not going to come up with nothing new. You can't teach it to write something or be creative or do things that humans do. But it's still very powerful because you can use it as a kickoff. You can use it, since everything is run by machines now, you can run your resume through one of these generative AIs, and then it's a machine-ready resume, and maybe that will give you a leg up. I don't know, things are crazy out there with that too. It can help you get your research started, but it's not a substitute for creating your own content, creating your own blog posts, creating marketing programs for your company. These are things you've got to maybe get some help to get started doing, but you've got to fine tune them to make them work.
So one interesting story I saw within the last 2 weeks was that a lawyer used one of the AI, I think it was ChatGPT 3, to actually write a brief for a court case. Did anybody else see this?
Yep.
And it hallucinated.
Yeah, and it actually manufactured all of the corresponding law underneath it, because he didn't, and I learned a new word, shepherdize. You're actually, when you present in front of the bar, you're supposed to know exactly what each case is and how it applies or doesn't apply, and even if it's, quote, old law, you know.
Well, that's it. The thing,
amazing.
It might have been a really good place for him to start if he wasn't familiar with
Yes.
the cases. But he didn't pay attention to it, is basically what it was.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
He just
assumed that the AI was smarter than he was.
Well, and we've got to kind of approach it where the AI is the tool,
Yes.
not the solution.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
absolutely the moral of
But it actually, if it's the same one, it invented things that were not true.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
used statements that were not true, and so that's how they found out
Yeah.
that it wasn't correct.
It's
So
generative AI. It generated something new.
Yes.